Hey everybody, welcome to SwingBadder. I am your host. I am joined by Todd, my brother, and of course, the one, the only, my father. And today on this episode, we get to uncrack another contract. A contract that you may like, you may not like, you may cry, you may smile, but you are sure to be entertained. Dad, what do you have in store for us today, sir?
I think we should talk about the famous contract of Bobby Bonilla, which everyone talks about every year, is somewhere in July. Todd probably knows the date, Bobby Bonilla Day, July 1st.
July 1st, baby.
So I think maybe we should get into the story and then make our comments.
So crack open your favorite beverage, sit back, relax. Let's dive into Bobby Bonilla.
This contract is incredible. It is probably the most famous baseball contract from yesteryear for a number of reasons. The contract itself, a lot of people don't know this, sold at an auction for $180,000. Not the value of the contract. The actual paper the contract was written on was sold for $180,000. It became the standard for delaying a contract a couple of years and then taking and annuitizing out the value of it so that the team wasn't on the hook for this present time. You think what Shohei Ohtani did was revolutionary? Nobody even knew you could do this at the time it was done. And Bobby Bonilla took it and stretched it out. I love this contract. I love everything about this contract. This contract is the contract that me and my buddies joke about every single year because it's the one that make us look at baseball contracts. And at the time that he did this, nobody was deferring out a contract the way that he was. And when people started hearing that the Mets were still paying Bobby Bonilla in 2011, 2012, $1.19 million every single year on July 1st, well, it became Bobby Bonilla Day on July 1st. So but you have to imagine exactly what was going on at the time, because it wasn't just the fact that he deferred it. Yeah, he could defer it. Shohei Ohtani deferred his contract. That's a big deal. But at the time, nobody that was being paid $5.6 million a year at the time said, wait, hold on a second. I don't want the cash. Instead, what I want you to not pay me for 10 years. Unbelievable. Why would you do this? Because he went to the Wilpons, who owned the Mets at the time. Now, unbeknownst to a lot of people, the Wilpons had an investment manager, advisor, whatever you want to call it, by the name of Bernard Madoff. And Bernard Madoff was promising the Wilpons 10 to 14% returns on their money every single year. And so when Bobby Bonilla came to them and said, instead of paying me $5.6 million, why don't you take the money and invest it with your best friend, Mad Bernie, invest it with him, get you 10 to 14%, and then in 10 years, I want $1.19 million for 25 years. Did some quick math on that, and they said, you know what? This works for us because all we need to earn on this $5.6 million is 9.44%. And we'll make money by deferring this. What they didn't know is by the time they were paying off Bobby Bonilla, Bernie Madoff would be in prison. They would be going bust, and they have to sell the team to Steve Cohen in the midst of the whole thing. By the time it was all said and done, they might make one or two more runs at the World Series. Bonilla wasn't the player he was going to be, and they knew it, and so they took the payments and deferred them out based on this false promise of interest rates that were never going to happen. But who's laughing now? Bobby Bonilla still getting paid by the New York Mets, $1.19 million every single year, July 1st. So Bobby Bonilla, here's to you.
From a baseball point of view, just talking about baseball, one of the reasons Bobby Bonilla was in the position to pass on the money is that he was really a good baseball player, but more than that, he played for 25 seasons. That's a long time cashing checks, even though in those days it wasn't checks like today. Toward the last 10, 15 years of his career, he was making over $2 million, $3 million a year. You do that for 25 years, you don't really have to have a paycheck right now. That's what put him in a position to do it.
A lot of baseball players didn't have that discipline. They didn't have that discipline at all. And even after the New York Mets, he signed the contract with the Atlanta Braves for $200,000, and signed a contract with the St. Louis Cardinals the year after that for $900,000, and then signed a contract with the Baltimore Orioles. He's still getting paid by them $500,000 a year. Basically, this guy was just adding up annual payments every single year from the year he turned 41 in 2004.
So I have a quick question. Did he not have an investor or a financial planner to look at this? Because if you're deferring $6 million at that time, instead of taking the money and investing it himself, could he have been better off? Let's say if he picked winners, like if he picked Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, any of these winners, and if he put his money into the winner and said, hey, in this 25-year time frame, or in this case, it's 35 years, correct? Because the 10-year deferment, 35 years.
Right.
What would that investment look like? Real estate, whatever it may be. I understand what you're saying is he already made the money and he was very disciplined, but it's interesting that an investment portfolio manager didn't want to take that money that he would get and invest it themselves rather than wait for it. But you are correct. This is a big jump. You're talking about roughly an additional $25 million. Guaranteed. That's right. The other part. It's guaranteed. You make zero investments, zero stock picks. You just get it.
Well, you got to keep in mind what was happening at the time. It was 2001, so it was right before 9/11, but you had just had the tech bubble burst. So you could say, yeah, I'm going to invest in Amazon, I'm going to invest in Google, I'm going to invest in Apple, but nobody knew at the time that they were going to do that. Heck, for all they knew, it could have been shopdog.com, which at the time had gone to like umpteen $1 billion and then totally crashed. You remember those commercials with the dog and or it could have been like even Yahoo at the time. You were talking about investments that were getting completely smashed and blown up. On top of this, the financial guy who was his agent at the time that negotiated the deal, as I understand it, actually was an insurance guy who sold annuities.
Interesting.
And honestly, like if you're going to say to somebody, I'm going to give you a guaranteed 9.44%, not bad.
No.
It's not bad till you're going to get paid till you're 72 years old. And right now you're 38, 39 years old. It's a much smarter decision than taking the $5.5 million right now, going out and buying a Lambo and a condo and pulling a Plaxico Burress and shooting yourself in the leg at a nightclub. And next thing you know, you're blown it all, which is more like that could happen.
In our family, I would say Kyle would take this deal. I would not take this deal.
This is not a Brendan.
No.
This is definitely a Kyle financial move on the part of Bobby Bonilla, which makes him very smart.
I wouldn't doubt it. Kyle is a very, very smart man.
Dad, from a baseball perspective, before Bonilla signed the deal and taking a look at his stats, before he signed this contract, he was with the Pirates. I know he came up with the White Sox. What were people saying about him as a player? And what was, because he was very positive, as I recall.
Well, he was a good player. I think he made 6 All-Star teams, 25 years. I mean, he's not, I wouldn't call him Hall of Fame, but, he was a steady hitter. He's an offensive player. I'm doing from memory, but I believe he was a switch hitter. Maybe I'm wrong. But he had some power. The most home runs he ever hit in a year, I think, were 33. So we're not talking Willie Mays or Mickey Mantle stuff, but he was a good hitter. He would be in your lineup. If you had him as number 5, you would have a good offensive team. So he was certainly good everywhere he went until he got older. He produced, he would drive runs in. He was pretty steady. I don't think he was ever considered a streaky player. In terms of driving in runs, he drove in 100 runs only 3 times in his career. He had back-to-back years with the Pirates where he drove in 120 and 100, and 2 years before that 100, so that's 3. He had 1 year with the Orioles over 100, But outside of that, he was pretty much in the 70 to 90 runs batted in per year, which is, let's tell the truth, that's good. And you certainly wanted him in your lineup. And the fact that he played a long time is another great factor.
His 162 game average was right, like you said, right around 92. The RBI is 279 batting average.
Yeah.
So, I think 22 home runs. And
the hard thing to evaluate is we think of that guy on today's money. That guy on today's money would probably be making what, 25 a year? 20?
I think probably 20 after he gets through the initial league minimum. I mean, his career was a 30 WAR. He had a WAR of 30 for his career.
An outfielder making 20, 15 to 20. 15, you're right, 15 to 20 million.
Then he was making two. He was making $2 million, $3 million in the beginning. I mean, after he went through his rookie stuff. So he was well paid, but money was different then.
When he played with Bonds, I remember those years. I mean, those two guys were kind of stellar young, and they were in somewhat of their prime. That was kind of the fun years for the two of them.
But I don't think Bonds and him were ever compared as the same level.
No, they were not.
No, but the Pirates were certainly really good when they had both of them.
Yes.
So I'm looking at Baseball Reference. They do similar batters, and they have Paul O'Neill and Raul Ibanez, and Andrew McCutchen were similar batters to Bobby Bonilla. That seems like a decent comparison to me. Like I think of Raul Ibanez, a guy who strikes out more than you want him to. He doesn't have the power you think he should have. But hits for an average that you're not walking away from. Like that's...
Yeah, but I think when he signed his first big contract with the Mets, they got him off the Pirates and the Mets signed him. I think at the time, it was the biggest contract in the history of baseball by a lot. I read something like it was $2 million a year more than anybody else had ever gotten. And people were surprised. They knew he was a good player. But, I mean, this was betting that this guy was going to be first-team All-Star every year. So I think the Mets probably overstepped, but they wanted him, and they had the money, and they weren't going to let him stay with the Pirates. So it was 92, and they were pretty flush with it. They gave him like $5.8 million a year for 5 years. That was at the time.
And 29. And that was the year after they had just made Jose Canseco the $5 million guy in 1991. And then Darryl Strawberry had gotten $5 million a year.
So it was an awful lot to give the guy, but everybody said, well, he's got to be great. And he was good. Okay, he was really a good player, but I don't, I think the Mets may have overvalued him, but how can you tell?
Well, I think that a lot of that's based on potential, right? Because you look at a guy at the beginning of the year, he was 22 and 86. So by then he's 28 years old. The guy's at his peak. And the Mets are thinking to themselves, we got to get back to where we were in the late 80s. We've just given up. I think that was the year they'd given up Lenny Dykstra. They needed somebody to partner with in the outfield with Strawberry. And so they bet heavy on this guy. And then he ends up playing 124 games, 130 games, 128 games,
Without this deal ever occurring for him, is he even recalled? Is he even remembered for a Mets fan? Or is the deal cemented him in all-time history forever?
That is a great question.
The deal is cemented him in all-time history forever because the contract was sold at auction for $180,000. Like the actual contract that was written on. And like you look at the way deals are structured and now I would say this. I don't think you have the Shohei Ohtani deal if you don't have the Bobby Bonilla deal before. So in the article that I wrote that we're going to post, I said you can date everything as before the Bobby Bonilla and after Bobby Bonilla. After Bobby Bonilla's contract.
But if he doesn't have this deal, if there is no Bobby Bonilla deal, he takes the $6 million, goes away, doesn't wait the 10 years and get $25 million. I think he's just one of the baseball players that used to play. I don't think it's not even...
He's remembered as a good player. I mean, did he ever get any consideration for the Hall of Fame? I don't think so.
No, I don't think he's in a Ring of Honor on any of the teams.
He, I just remember being, a lot younger then, but I always felt that one of the best hitters that got little recognition was a guy named Al Oliver, and no one remembers Al Oliver today. But I would love to see his stats compared to Bonilla's. I would say
better. The reason Bonilla signed that contract was because he had finished second and third in MVP voting in the years leading up to that. And he had made the All-Star game 4 games in a row. But Al Oliver, statistically, especially after Scott Rowland getting into the Hall of Fame, Al Oliver should be in the Hall of Fame. Bobby Bonilla should not. If anything, Bobby Bonilla would be remembered as by Met fans as, number one, the guy that we squandered money on in 1992 and then brought back a major disappointment in 2001 and then let go. And it would be just a story of wasted talent. It's not a story where we remember this guy because he was really talented. We remember this guy because this was the guy that should have been better than he actually was. That's how we would remember.
If you look at the numbers, he was, I think, 29 when the Mets signed him. In the years he was with the Mets, probably about 5-6 years, Todd, somewhere in there, those years were no better than the years he was on the Pirates and younger. In fact, you could make a case he performed a little better on the Pirates than he did on the Mets. He never drove in 100 runs for the Mets. He did it 3 times for the Pirates.
It was the games played. If you look at the 3 years for the Pirates before he came to the Mets, he played 159 games, 163 games. I don't know how he pulled that. And then 160 games and 157 games. So those are 4 years leading up to. So it's a durable guy who's out there batting 280 to 302. These are the ranges that I'm looking at right now. He's getting 680 at bats. He goes to the Mets. The most he ever played was 139 games.
He never played in 140 games, 4 years. And he was 20 games less, basically, than what he played for the Pirates.
I think his weight ballooned. I think that was part of it, too, is he really got out of shape bad. Made the All-Star game once at the age of 30. But then after 1994, the Mets just, they canned him and they, they said, we're done with this. And then in 95, he went over to Baltimore.
So, but at this stage of the game, he hasn't signed the contract we're talking about.
Correct. Yeah, he came back to the Mets when he was 36, after he had been with the Dodgers. And with the Dodgers, he had batted 237. I mean, but this was fresh. This was fresh on the heels of him, of the Mets going into Mo Vaughn territory, or like right before going into Mo Vaughn territory. I remember this signing in particular when they signed Bobby Bonilla, and we ridiculed this signing. This guy was a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man that had swollen like beyond all recognition. He was probably flirting with steroids to try to extend his career. But again, at this time, you're a year removed from Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa. We're on the cusp of Barry Bonds looking like he could make it and going into, hitting home runs and coming up to his 2004 season. How far off was Bonilla from doing a little bit of the Andro and making things happen for himself?
Bonilla was on the Marlins when they won the World Series in 97. In 98, he played 28 games with the Marlins, and they pushed him off onto the Dodgers. Between the two in 98, he only played 100 games, and he only hit 11 home runs all season long. And with the Dodgers, the 70 games of the Dodgers, he batted .237. That's the guy the Mets signed at age 36. That's a head scratcher.
That's the deal they signed him for the $6 million.
But the Mets took on the last year of the Marlins contract. The last 2 years, they took on the last 2 years of the Marlins contract because this contract was originally signed with the Marlins in 97. So the Marlins said they were going to pay him $5.6 million a year and then 5.9, 5.9, 5.9. And so what the Mets did was they took the last year of the contract in 2000. They paid him in 1999. And in the last year of the contract in 2000, they paid him to walk away by deferring it at that 9.8% or the 9.44%.
How smart for the Marlins. The Marlins won a World Series, and in the next year, after 28 games, they convinced the Dodgers to take him. And then the Dodgers convinced the Mets to take him, and the Marlins are sitting there with a World Series trophy and no bills to pay.
But that was the Marlins. Do you remember the Marlins at that time? They'd win a World Series, and then the whole team would go on the auction block because they didn't want to pay anybody.
But usually the team with the contract would take some retainer of the contract. So the fact that they were able to move the money, because in today's era, there's a lot of players to be named later that have a lot of money getting paid to them and owed to them from past teams they played on. So he was able to move, the Florida Marlins were able to move the money with Bobby.
Excuse me, Todd, did you ever find out who his agent was that did this deal?
I know at one point we were reaching out because we wanted to interview this guy. This was the guy I wanted to interview. This was the first interview I wanted BadderSports and SwingBadder to do. But we'll get that.
Because, I mean, he just worked such a magical deal. He went to the Mets and they agreed to pay him $5.9 million. He played with the Mets. I got to look at this. A ridiculously low amount, 60 games, hit 4 home runs, okay? And really cemented his getting dumped during a playoff game. He and Ricky Henderson were in the dugout playing cards. They weren't even in the dugout watching the game. And they were so incensed by that. They said, I don't care how much you pay, we're getting rid of this guy. So how he turned all that, 60 games, 4 home runs, and he came out, man, it's just like he walked into Vegas and just pulled winners all night long.
It was, so the guy's name is Dennis Gilbert. He's the co-founder of the Beverly Hills Sports Council. It's a sports agency. So his clients have included Barry Bonds, Jose Canseco, Mike Piazza, George Brett, and Bonilla. So he has a background in the insurance business, and that helped him shape a lot of the contracts that he sourced out. So, but you got to think too, like this was the time when the Mets were flush with cash because they had just gotten SNY, which was their own network, because the Yes Network had flooded the New York Yankees with cash.
And I think
and the Mets were thinking, hey, we could be a new version of the Yankees.
I think given their frustration with him, they were happy to pay him to go away. But their decision to change $5.6, you said, $5.8 million into 30, almost $40 million, that was the real bonehead move.
Well, it's not a bonehead move if I think I'm getting 10 to 14%.
Yeah, you can think anything. That doesn't make it happen, okay?
Bernie told me it was a rock steady deal.
You know how they have statues for great athletes? They just unveiled some statues. The great Kobe Bryant had his statue unveiled recently. I think Bobby Bonilla needs a statue of him signing this deal. That's what he needs a statue of. And that statue needs to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Because to your point, Todd, this is pre-Bobby Bonilla contracts and post-Bobby Bonilla contracts. And one of the areas that we dive into at SwingBadder is not only contracts, but a lot of these owners deferring massive payments. I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a championship today.
Now, a lot of people think because of the Hispanic last name of Bonilla that he probably came up from the Dominican or something like that. Bobby Bonilla was born in the Bronx. he was a New Yorker from the beginning. So I think it's only right that he would, even though the Bronx is the home of the Yankees, that he would take money from a New York team for the rest of his life.
And he's never been disappointed by that decision.
Nope. I got a kick last year, a year ago before, when somebody asked him, what do you do with this money? And he said, I got to pay the mortgage, man. And I said, nice house.
He knows what's up.
Interest rates are up. Well, that is our episode here with Bobby Bonilla. Thank you for the request out there. Please leave a comment. Please leave your story of what you remember. And yes, the pre-Bobby Bonilla era was so basic. You sign a contract, you get paid, nothing gets deferred. I look forward to the statue that they make of Bonilla signing this contract. And thank you, Dad. Thank you, Todd. And thank you for joining us at SwingBadder. I am your host, Brendan. Until next time.